and I've learned so much about the birds here in North Wales, UK and abroad. It's certainly given me a lot of inspiration about things I'd like to do in the future. Right, so birds in Durham. Oops. Yep. Oh. Try that again, sorry. There we go. Right. Yeah, so I would say that compared to other birders, I would say that my experience is relatively limited, to be honest, certainly with bird watching in Durham. So to help me out, I'll be referring to published literature throughout, including the latest edition of the Natural History of Upper Teesdale, edited by Steve Gator. That's on its 5th edition now. Where to Watch Birds in Northeast England by Dave Britton and John Day. And the latest, the 2012 edition of the Birds of Durham from the Durham Bird Group. The first edition of the Natural History of Upper Weedale has only just come out. I'm looking forward to reading that. I suppose if I was doing this in person, I'd ask the audience if anyone's been to Teesdale before. I know the company Nature Trek hosts wildlife tours there. You might know Ian Finley and Dr. Margaret Bradshaw. Actually, Ian was telling me last year he used to train on a grey tom back in the 70s, I think, as part of his mountain rescue training. And I've met others along the way, including the vet Neville Turner, David Bellamy, Gordon Buchanan, and Chris Backer. So a bit of context. Hi, I'm Cameron. I'm a 3rd year zoology student at Bangor University. And when I'm not writing essays and my dissertation, where I can, I'm trying to improve my skills as a wildlife photographer and more recently, wildlife filmmaking. Not sure how well that last part will work tonight as the frame rate on Zoom drops quite a bit, but we'll see how that goes. So during my 1.5 years of, well, let's say normal university, I attended work parties with the Conservation Society in association with the North Wales Wildlife Trust, and a few events with the Birding Society, along with independent trips to various places around the region like Little Orme and South Stack, which are my favourites. And through that, I think I've seen quite a lot of bird species during my time here. Many species I hadn't seen before. I haven't seen much in the way of plant and insect life here yet, but hopefully I can come back here on some holidays in the future. Notable highlights include chough, hooded crow, rose-coloured starling in both summer and winter plumage, my only sighting of a goshawk, and bower-rolling ravens, which the latter was actually featured in Autumn Watch last year.
I'm going to trump you with a raven, not just any raven, but a tumbling raven. Have a look at this. A raven tumbling in slow motion. Look at that. Isn't that magnificent? They do this all the way over on its back and all the way back over again, and this is part of their courtship display. If you go out and about at this very moment, you may well see a raven doing that, cronking constantly. So I reckon a tumbling raven beats a hoopoo.
And I had planned to get back to the raven roost on Anglesey this year, but the way things are, especially with my current studies, I can't at the moment. I was fortunate last year to see at least 200 ravens last year. Anyway, on to the main theme of the talk, Durham. Seen here within the red polygon. It's actually quite big at around 2,000 square kilometres, about a third the size of North Wales. The area holds around 30% of the UK's upland hay meadows, 20% of the UK's upland heathland, and 60% of the UK black grouse population. Records vary dramatically from year to year, but there was a peak in recordings in 1993 of 334 males at 36 select sites. There's also rare Arctic alpine plants and over 20,000 pairs of breeding wading birds, which nest annually within the Blanket Peat and Heather Moorland areas. I realise the text may not have rendered, so with the red arrows from left to right, you've got the middle of Teesdale, Durham City in the middle, and the Durham Heritage Coast. Right. Actually, I was reading that a recent mineshaft expedition in Teesdale had found Capercaillie bones, which they dated to around 10,000 years ago, which I thought was really interesting. So I think most people associate Durham with, well, Durham Cathedral, which features heavily in the Lumiere events. Kinrin, which is an outdoor historical performance in Bishop Auckland, and West Auckland, that was the home of the first World Cup back in 1909. And it features two main rivers and dales with the Wear and the Tees. And I'm from Teesdale, which is just a little bit bigger than Anglesey at around 836 square kilometres and home to about 25,000 people. It borders Cumbria to the west and North Yorkshire to the south, and it really is a great place to live. The red map at the top right is just to show how big the district of Teesdale is compared to the rest of the Durham districts. The very eastern district is sort of Cleveland and the Durham Heritage Coast. And then the northern districts border on sort of Gateshead, Newcastle upon Tyne. And there's some stunning scenery all year round, especially in the winter, which we've had a lot of snow cover this year. This is Harwood in Teesdale, right at the northwest tip, just before the Weardale border. And it has some fascinating history, geology, flora and fauna. And speaking of geology, we have one, if not the tallest waterfall in England at around 21 metres, which looks very dramatic in full spate, although I'm yet to see this myself. And of course, the hub of Teesdale, the historic market town of Barnard Castle. Well, hang on, Barnard Castle, you know, that place sounds familiar. Ah yes, Barney, as we know it as, with probably best looking roundabout in England, classic 19th century Bowes Museum featuring the amazing Silver Swan automaton, and last but by no means least, the world's most famous branch of Specsavers. Anyway, so how did I get into wildlife photography in the first place? I don't think there was really a beginning as such. It's been a gradual process over the past 10 years, although during university that rate has gone up. In terms of trigger events, when a waxwing landed on a tree in my front garden in 2013, that was, you know, nice to say the least. And this was picked up by the local paper, the Teesdale Mercury. And I'm quite fortunate I can walk into town quite easily via the Teesdale Way footpath, although it's not much further to the Pennine and Greta Way. There's lots to see around town, especially the kingfishers along the river, where I saw my first in late 2018. And after a while, I managed to find the best spots to see them along the river. And more recently, pied flycatchers in Deepdale Woods. And walking around the woods in May, there's a very good chance you'll see both male and female. The literature actually reports around 150 breeding pairs in Durham county-wide. I've seen at least 3 pairs in Deepdale alone. In 2019, I saw my first white letter hare streak there, and although I didn't realise it at the time, there was this weird cocoon-shaped kind of chunk that was moving around on the floor, and I was thinking, what on earth is that? And I think looking back, it was probably the tail of a slow worm. I haven't seen one of these in Teesdale yet, These images were taken at an open day at Treborth Gardens in Bangor in first year. Deepdale is part of the Durham Wildlife Trust and is managed by John Durkin and his fantastic team of volunteers. They install nest boxes for common redstart, pied and spotted flycatcher, all since 2012. In fact, although they haven't been seen for a while, it was one of the few places in Durham where you could spot lesser spotted woodpeckers, with regular reports between 1990 and 2005. And while we're on the topic of nature reserves, Haybury's near Eggleston is council owned, and among rare orchids in the summer, it's one of the largest San Martin colonies in the northeast, with 220 pairs recorded in 1990. So I've been moving about between Teesdale and North Wales for the past 3 years. Actually, I think these traffic estimates are probably quite conservative. It usually takes a bit longer, especially when there's thick fog in the North Pennines. But during second year of university, on the 4th of March, when we went to look for velvet scoter off the northeast coast of Anglesey, I had literally taken one photo, and my trusty Canon DSLR, which I'd had since 2016, broke, mainly because I leave it on continuous shutter for wildlife. And it turns out I'd actually worn out the shutter curtain. I had planned to upgrade in a few years, but I took the plunge and dived into the Sony mirrorless system. And it was great that I could use my existing lens via an adapter. So far, it's been fantastic. It's opened up opportunities of slow motion video, 4K video, and the silent shutter feature, which is ideal for wildlife photography. Here are a few examples of the 120 frames per second slow motion. These are all handheld thanks to the in-body stabilization that Sony has. The first two were in Teesdale, but that last one, the female black redstart, that was actually, well, I could see that from the window where I am now. It landed on the flat opposite me late last year, which was fantastic, as it was, you know, lockdown birding from a room, if you like. Anyway, back to Teesdale. So with this new camera, I started my lockdown walks around my village near Barner Castle. And one of the first birds to see was a passing northern wheatear. And it was great, as usually I'd have to travel up to Upper Teesdale to see them. I certainly will be looking out for them in the village from now on. But it's not just the migrants that catch my eye. These blue tits were nesting in my neighbour's garage wall, and it was fantastic to watch parents come and feed the chicks. You could view these at a safe distance. These shots were taken about 8 meters away. Apologies for the audio quality on that one. That was before I invested in a sort of dedicated mic. Yeah, there we go. This has greatly improved the audio quality of my videos, but it's still picking up noise from the focus on the internal motors. Recently, I've been trying to move a microphone off camera, like this attempt to duct tape it to a sun hat. But as well, you can see, inspired by the work of Heath Robinson, it still needs work. So I've known in previous years that a variety of summer migrants breed in the village. So I look out for common whitethroats and common redstarts, yellow wagtails, which I saw good numbers of last year, both male and female. and the linnets. We've got another video. And the resident yellowhammers, where the bird club estimates around 6,500 pairs county-wide. And by doing the same walks on a daily basis, I got to learn the calls of these birds. I didn't have to scope them all the time. And it turned out the red star is quite a tricky one. I think by the end of June, I had recorded 12 instances of red starts making their usual calls. And then rather like starlings, they mimic and add a bit of another bird's call on at the end. And as more avian migrants came into the Dale, I started this thing called KESQuest, which was basically to photograph any kestrel-looking bird of prey, even if it was at a distance, in the hope that it might be something else. And it worked. I saw my first ever hobby, and then a few weeks later I saw another. And then later in the season, I saw a merlin fly over my village, chasing swallows and house martins. So when the lockdown restrictions began to be lifted, I started to branch very cautiously further afield, all within walking distance of where I live. And in the case of the cuckoos, usually at a time where nowhere else was around. After planning some walking routes, and with a heads up from the BTO's cuckoo tracking project, I saw my first Teesdale cuckoo. And here I am at around 5:20 in the morning, very pleased to have seen one. And now that I knew roughly where they are, I would return to these sites, usually dressed in camo gear, walking along the main road and footpaths. And then one day, just after I'd seen my first live adder, I saw this. So 3 cuckoos together, fantastic. Up until then, I'd never seen more than 2 at once. Here's another one, which just landed on the branch above me. It was at quite a height, it was a good sort of 10 meters up the tree. Yeah, it gave me one hell of a neck ache afterwards because it was virtually a 90-degree angle, but definitely worthwhile. So what else can I see from home, or on foot from home, as people say nowadays? I'm fortunate that I can see quite a variety of owls in the village, and one species that I've grown fond of over the past 3 years is the little owl. They nest in the same spot year on year, and it's positioned a safe distance from the footpath. We get a lot of dog walkers passing through, and they've developed sort of an awareness of people. But in peak summer, the drama really starts when other birds start to bomb them. Here we are with a swallow taking shots, and the owls can get quite annoyed by this. I'm not sure if you can make it out, but the little owl had a worm, and I wasn't quite sure at the time whether blackbirds were wanting the owl to give up the worm or were just wanting it to move along. Apologies for the shutter noise of my old cannon. The nest sits on a site which is on my usual walking route, so every day you can glance across. Most days you won't see any, some you might see one, but very rarely you can see two together. Sometimes they even call out, which makes finding them, especially in hard contrast lighting, a lot easier. And they are fairly site faithful. Records indicate around 330 known territories county-wide. In the last 2 years, I've seen little owls at least 12 locations across Teesdale alone. So last year was a really great year for barn owls in the Dale. I think this was mainly due to the abundance of voles. Occasionally, they can get into issues with waders like oyster catchers and curlews. It was great to see drama like this. You know, you're keeping a safe distance, so you're not disturbing them, you're just letting things play out. And in at least 2 areas last year, we had 10 barn owls at both sites. Those sites have now been recognised by the Barn Owl Conservation Trust, and these were taken from the roadside. Records indicate from 2009, when the last major survey was done, around 60 to 100 pairs of barn owls in Durham. Tawny owls are very widespread. Here's one in my back garden, often keeping me awake at night with their calling. And here's from the woods in Barner Castle, not far from Deepdale. 2020 was the first year I saw recently fledged tawny owls, and this one caught me off my guard as it was in a tree just above a Teesdale Way footpath. Some owls, they just don't want their photo taken, but others are certainly curious. So Teesdale has two main areas really, upper and lower, with Upper Teesdale having more of a wild feel to it. This is forest in Teesdale and looks fantastic in the summer and winter alike. I suppose it's similar to the Nant-Franken Valley here in North Wales. There's specific areas of Upper Teesdale which are great for flora, especially Cronkley Fell and Weedybank Fell near Cow Green Reservoir. Here we have grass of Panassus and monkey flower found along Harwood Beck, and bird's eye primrose supercluster, and of course the iconic blue gentian or Teesdale gentian. In fact, John O'Reilly has just done a talk with the Natural History Society of Northumbria, where he explains why Teesdale is such a hotspot for rare plants, in part due to the sugar limestone habitats and the high altitudes of the North Pennines. It's on YouTube. I'd highly recommend it if you're into your botany. And during his talk, a lot of sort of details of Margaret Bradshaw's, Dr. Margaret Bradshaw's surveys. She's been surveying plants in the Dale for the best part of 70 years, and it's no surprise that in these areas of high flora diversity, they attract many avian species, including snipe. In the spring, when the snipe are re-establishing their territories, they'll often perch on field posts and dry stone walls, and from the car, you can get really close without disturbing them. Here's one calling. They also perform these fantastic aerial displays with the drumming calls over the meadows, and it can be quite a challenge to capture them in flight, also giving me another neck ache. Records indicate around sort of 2,500 breeding pairs in the county. And in the same area again early morning, I saw this on the hillside, and it didn't look quite right for some reason. It's just a bit far to see by eye, but when I cropped the image, I realized I'd seen my first woodcock. And from then, I saw at least another 6 woodcock across Teesdale at various times of the day. Here we are with my first attempt at trying to capture the call of a woodcock. I think there's a tawny owl calling here in the background too. They really do fly like a slow bat. It's fantastic to watch. Not sure how well the audio came out on that, but there were 2 different calls from the woodcock. I think it's referred to as roding, but not sure. Records indicate just over 1,000 pairs in the county, but as their nests are well hidden, recorded breeding sites has been difficult to sort of establish. So I've seen short-eared owls at the Gronant Dunes and Parkgate here in North Wales, but to see them in Teesdale is special. These are my first record shots of them on the Teesdale-Wealdale border, and in the bottom right image you can just about make out it's caught some sort of prey. But after a few weeks of planning, I was eventually able to get closer. Both these pictures were taken from the road, with actually the left owl on the road. And from the car, it was great to watch them hunt. And here, this short-eared owl, which was one of 3 on the day, had spotted me from quite a distance, and he came over to check me out. This slow motion feature was something my Canon just simply couldn't do. I think there's a lot of potential, especially in cases such as this. Some days you wouldn't see any short-eared owls, but other days you could see 1 or 2 or even 3. Records indicate there could be between 10 and 20 nesting pairs, but it varies considerably from year to year. In 2019, back in Bangor, along with a few other student birders, we went on a long-eared owl survey, which I think at the time was part of a wider Birds in Wales scheme. We saw lots of tawny owls, but unfortunately no long-eared. But that got me thinking about potential sites in Teesdale that I could explore. So with a rough idea of the habitats long-eared owls like to be in, again, it took a few attempts, but I saw this alert long-eared owl in Upper Teesdale. Although I was at a distance of about 30 meters, hence the image quality. I later learned through the long-eared owl network on Twitter that when the long-eared owls have their sort of ear feather tufts down, it means they are more relaxed, which was a relief. As the last thing I want to do is disturb the wildlife while I'm recording it. Records indicate around 40 pairs in Durham, but obviously these are locations that get very hush-hush. onto the Pennine Way now, and last year was the first time I saw a juvenile ring-ouzel. This one hopped up onto the wall for about 7 seconds before passing kestrel spooked it. Definitely one of my favourite birds, occupying the niche of the mountain blackbird. And there are certain places where, along the Teesdale footpath, where you can get relatively close. Obviously not too close as Schedule 1 listed. And this video was taken just outside Middleton. It's the only time I've heard one call, and what a fantastic call they have. Records indicate around 300 pairs countywide, with around 30 pairs in moorland locations such as Upper Teesdale and Upper Weardale. And in summer 2020, a very exciting sighting was seen. Partially leucistic ring-ouzel was seen in Weardale, pictured here by Graham Stoker. I think I had a brief video clip for that as well. Onto the sort of southern boundary of Teesdale now. From this OS map, you can see just how close North Yorkshire is with that yellow boundary. The Stang Forest, which is at the very southern heights. It can be a tricky place to get to, especially during winter. But when conditions are manageable, it's well worth it. So being at the southern heights, we get a lot of passing birds like raven. There's also crossbill, and it's great to watch them detach whole cones from the trees. It's definitely an area I need to explore further. We also have some of the ponds in Stang Forest. This is a broad-bodied chaser. There's quite a few other dragonflies there as well. But we get occasional passing birds like the snow bunting here. I think 2 were seen this year. And onto the larger of the 2 plantations. Hampsley Forest, which is definitely one of the largest forests in County Durham. Oh, sorry, I'm having a bit of technical issues. Crossbills, there we go. So in summer, sorry, some technical issues here. Not quite sure what's going on. So crossbills are probably one of the commonest birds in the Stang. We regularly get flocks of sort of 200, and especially during the heat wave that we had last year, they would come to temporary pools, and in certain places you could get very close. think I've got a video of it as well. Oh, there we go. So the tree pipit was a new species for me to see last year. I'd only known it was there because of it was calling, but every now and again in the Stang Forest you come across something really strange, like this shrew, which for some reason was biting on this dead adder. Usually it's the other way around. And of course the stoats, and some of the young ones are very curious. I did have a look around this winter, and although I saw 2 green woodpeckers, at the time the temperature hadn't gone low enough for ermine stoats. I did briefly see one in the Nant-Fracken Valley 2 years ago, but I haven't seen one since. Going back to green woodpeckers, I was fortunate enough to see juveniles in 2019, and it was great to hear them yaffling. It's estimated there are around 200 pairs county-wide. There's also lots of anthills scattered about the forest, and it would be great to see them feed on them one day. I think I had a video. Yeah. So the wood ants, fascinating to watch. I've lost count of how many hills I've seen in Hampstead Forest, and I can't fill them for very long at this distance, as they soon start to navigate their way up the tripod. I'm pretty sure if they wanted to, they could just reduce the entire forest to wood shavings. There must be so many of them. And going back through the records, it seems Hampstead Forest was a gold mine for wildlife. In 1953, they had 6 fledgling Montagu's harriers, with 3 in 1956. There's also regular great grey shrike, flocks of around 200 brambling can be seen, and until relatively recently, regular sights of goshawks. So in peak summer, when the daylight hours are stretched, I wanted to try a few potential sites for nightjar. I'd never seen nightjar before, but I was keen to see one, or at least hear one calling. And I tried a few local plantations on a few separate occasions. The first attempt, there was actually logging taking place, not like I hear was machinery. The second time, I had a god-awful experience with millions and millions of midges. Goodness me. I had a site scouted out. I could hear male nightjars churning, but I just couldn't stay there. I had no head net or midge spray. It's like something out of a reality TV program. So third time lucky, after finding the ideal midge spray through a Scottish anglers forum, success. So there were 3 calls there, the churning and the flight calls of the nightjar, and there was a calling long-eared owl as well. There are many nightjar records for Teesdale. Up until 2012, when the last major survey was done, there were 39 individuals recorded across 3 sites. And I was glad to have seen one that night, as on the way out I saw this. Yes, unfortunately, I didn't come across any of that kind of thing. This got picked up by the local paper. So living in an area surrounded by moorland, I suppose it's inevitable that you'll come across red grouse. Despite their controversy, I like red grouse. They have fantastic call, and they make great subjects in the summer with the grass when the plumage coloration comes along. But the black grouse, the real deal. We have quite a few lake sites in Durham, with a few in Teesdale, and it's great to watch and hear them calling. In the winter months, you may find them up trees, and they usually aren't too bothered if you're in a car. We get good numbers of female grouse too, and in the same areas, we get lots of breeding waders like curlews, lapwings, and golden plover. I think golden plover have a very smart appearance, and when they call, they always seem much closer than they actually are. Records indicate around 300 pairs in 2007 countywide. Being in Teesdale during the summer and Bangor in the winter, I can see curlews virtually all year round. One of the first migrants to arrive in the village, I'm told that within the past week they've actually moved back and can be seen from my home. They can be quite defensive of their territories. Usually the curlews will defend a particular field. Should have a video of the first time I've seen curlew courtship. I think it's courtship. This was recorded less than a mile from home. Yeah, I don't think she's keen at the moment. I haven't actually seen them breed in the village yet, but I'm sure they will do soon. Records vary quite dramatically from year to year, but a study in 2000 indicated that Durham holds between 7 and 18.5% of the UK's breeding population. Northern wheatears breed in Upper Teesdale in good numbers, and they can make great subjects for photography. The Bird Club reports anywhere up to 650 pairs in Durham, particularly in the upland areas of short grazed grassland and the moors. So approaching the end of my wildlife sightings in Teesdale, last year was the first time I've seen an osprey in a dale, and this particular osprey was seen again at other reservoirs. And in previous years, have actually been seen flying over Barner Castle. We also have increasing numbers of avocets just outside Teesdale into North Yorkshire. And if you're lucky, you might see a partially leucistic curlew that apparently comes over every spring from Northern Ireland. So sharing wildlife sightings, especially of Teesdale, it's something I've always been keen to do. But with moving between North Wales so much of the year, I wanted to create a wildlife specific page for the community to upload their sightings. So in early 2020, I set up Teesdale Wildlife Sightings, and unlike other community-led Facebook pages, it aims to showcase just the wildlife aspects of Teesdale. And in a year since it's been running, we've had some fantastic records from the residents of the Dale, including rare hare ice at Hampsterley, snow buntings at the Stang, hen harriers, merlins, what we think to be the first photograph of a red squirrel in Teesdale, as well as fledgling tawny owls, ospreys, and hobbies. and many more great records. TWS is now part of a growing network of pages where users can upload their sightings in Durham. And going back through bird guides over the past 20 years, there's been some fantastic sightings that really stood out, including hoopoo, golden eagle, black and white stork, wryneck, and Gaia falcon. And here is the falcon, and apparently it was spotted in Darlington, just down the road 3 days earlier, and it announced its arrival into Barnard Castle by flying into a window, landing in the back garden in Startford, which is only around 100 metres from the castle itself. I have asked around, and apparently it was later found deceased underneath a viaduct in Lartington, which is a few miles northwest of Barney, so that fits. So now hopefully I've convinced you that Teesdale is a fantastic place, but there are other areas in Durham which are worth mentioning. Bishop Midland Quarry is a fantastic place for rare plants such as bee orchids and insects including the northern brown argus, 6-spot and narrow-bordered 5-spot burnet moths. It's one of the few places in the region to see corn bunting too. I visited a few times in 2019, and it's a great place to view the nesting sand martins. But the quarry is nationally famous for being one of the few sites in the UK where bee eaters have actually bred successfully. I think I had a video. So in 2002, out of the 4, 2 juveniles fledged and attracted birders from not only across the region, but across the country as well, as they were the first to breed in the UK for 47 years. Moving further towards the Durham Heritage Coast is Teesside and Cleveland, which you can just about see from the Stang Forest. The image on the left is Hartlepool Nuclear Power Station, which was taken from the Stang Forest around 25 miles away. And like Parkgate, the area is a good spot for seeing short-eared owls. And the North Gare site is a good area for windchats. Also juvenile cuckoo and redback shrike. There's also mash shrike there too. There's been regular records of large flocks of between 80 and 100 snow buntings on the East Coast going back to the 1980s. And just down the road at Lizard's Point, there's around 3,000 pairs of kittiwakes. And here at Saltholm, where most of the sightings for Durham are centred, there's a virtually resident long-eared owl at Haverton Scrub. Then north of Middlesbrough in Hartlepool, like many places in the UK, we're getting increasing numbers of rose-winged parakeets. We've also had rare and megabirds, including Scops owl at Ryhope in 2017, red-spotted bluethroat from South Gare in May 2019, red-eyed vireo at Easington in October 2019, barred warbler, also at Hartlepool in November 2019, and tiger flycatcher in South Shields in 2020. And final few records. 2006 was the first year for 170 years red kites actually bred in County Durham. And in the same year, the avocets decided to breed at the Wetland Reserve in Washington. Later in 2009, a Northern Harrier was seen over Selset Reservoir in Teesdale, which was a first for Durham and a second time for Britain. And then in 2020, a common nighthawk was seen in Hordern, just outside of Peterlee. So until I go back to Teesdale later this year, in the meantime, I'm continuing my studies and my small-scale canvas printing business and applying to the University of Nottingham for a master's course in biological imaging. Last year, I was hoping to lead a few wildlife walks around the Dale, mapping out at least 7 sites with suitable footpaths. But I think like last year, we're going to have to postpone that certainly till next year, especially now people have booked staycations in the summer. So all that's left to say really is thanks for watching, and hopefully I've given you an insight into bird life in Durham.